What if a hero walked into town one morning, not a man, but a dog, carrying a fragile human life in his jaws? And what if the truth behind his journey was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined? Let us know where you're watching from. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when Elias spotted something moving at the edge of Pinewood Village. The old shopkeeper was arranging fresh bread on wooden shelves when movement outside his window caught his eye. Through the morning mist, a dark figure emerged, moving slowly but with purpose. Elias squinted, his weathered hands pausing mid-task. It was a dog, a large German shepherd, its fur matted with mud and twigs. But what made Elias's heart nearly stop was what the animal carried in its mouth. "Lord, have mercy," he whispered, rushing to the door. The German shepherd approached cautiously, its amber eyes reflecting exhaustion and something Elias could only describe as desperation. In the dog's gentle jaws was a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be a tattered blue blanket. The bundle moved slightly. Elias called out to his neighbor Maria, who was just stepping onto her porch. "Maria, come quickly!" His voice cracked with urgency as he slowly approached the dog. The German shepherd stopped, watching Elias with intelligent eyes, but didn't retreat. Instead, it lowered itself to the ground, placing the bundle carefully on the damp earth. Maria hurried over, her gray hair loosely tied back, still in her morning robe. "What is it, Elias? What's—" The words died in her throat as she saw what lay before them. The blanket had fallen back just enough to reveal a tiny, pale face. A baby. A human baby. "Is it—" Maria couldn't finish the sentence, fear gripping her heart. Elias knelt down, his old knees protesting, and gently touched the infant's cheek. "It's alive," he breathed, feeling warmth beneath his fingertips. "The child is alive." The baby couldn't have been more than a few months old. Its eyes were closed, face smudged with dirt, but its chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The German shepherd watched them intently, not moving away, but standing guard over its precious cargo. Word spread through Pinewood Village like wildfire. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered around Elias's shop. Dr. Reynolds, the village's only physician, pushed through, medical bag in hand. "Let me through," she commanded, her usually calm voice tinged with urgency. The German shepherd growled softly as the doctor approached, its protective instinct flaring. "Easy, boy," Dr. Reynolds said gently. "I'm here to help." Surprisingly, the dog seemed to understand, backing away just enough to allow her access to the baby while remaining close. "The child is dehydrated and cold," Dr. Reynolds announced after a brief examination, "but otherwise appears unharmed. It's a miracle." She looked at the German shepherd with newfound respect. This dog saved this baby's life. As they carefully moved the infant inside Elias's shop for warmth, Sheriff Cooper arrived, his typically stern face softened with concern. "Anyone recognize the dog?" he asked the gathered villagers. An uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd until old Tom, who lived at the edge of the forest, spoke up. "I've seen him before. Belongs to that newcomer, Archer, who moved into the abandoned cabin up in North Ridge about a year ago. Keeps to himself mostly. Haven't seen him in town for weeks, though." The sheriff's expression darkened. "North Ridge is at least 15 miles from here, through dense forest and across the river." He looked at the German shepherd with astonishment. This dog traveled all that way with a baby? The dog, exhausted but vigilant, had refused water or food, its eyes never leaving the bundle now, being tended to by Dr. Reynolds. There was something in those amber eyes, a silent urgency that spoke volumes. "Something's wrong," Maria said, voicing what everyone was thinking. Something terrible must have happened up at North Ridge. Sheriff Cooper nodded grimly. I need volunteers. We need to find out where this baby came from and what happened to its parents. He looked at the German shepherd. And I think our new friend here needs to lead the way. Dr. Reynolds spoke up from where she cradled the now awakening infant. Sheriff, before you go, you should see this. She gently turned the baby's tiny wrist, revealing a small silver bracelet. Engraved on it was a single word. Aurora. The baby opened her eyes, crystal blue and surprisingly alert, as if she knew her name had been spoken. The German shepherd whined softly, moving closer to the child. Aurora, Sheriff Cooper repeated. Well, at least we know her name. Now we need to find out her story, and I have a feeling it's going to be one that shocks us all. The villagers quickly organized themselves. Dr. Reynolds took the baby to her small clinic behind the general store, while Sheriff Cooper assembled a search party of 5 men. Himself, Elias, Tom, and 2 younger men from the village, Marcus and Riley. The German shepherd, whom they had started calling Sentinel, seemed to understand their intentions. Despite his obvious exhaustion, the dog paced anxiously at the edge of the village, looking back at them with what could only be described as impatience. He wants us to follow him, Marcus said, securing his backpack. It's like he knows exactly what we're trying to do. Sheriff Cooper nodded grimly. Animals have instincts we can barely comprehend. I've seen hunting dogs do remarkable things, but this... He shook his head in amazement. This is something else entirely. Before they departed, Maria brought a small piece of the baby's blanket for Sentinel to smell. The dog buried his nose in the fabric, whining softly. Then, with renewed purpose, he began trotting toward the dense forest that surrounded Pinewood Village, occasionally looking back to ensure the men were following. The journey was arduous. What might have been a straightforward trek in fair weather was complicated by the previous week's heavy rains, which had swollen the creek and left parts of the forest floor treacherously muddy. Yet Sentinel navigated the terrain with unwavering confidence, choosing paths that the men might have overlooked, avoiding sinkholes and unstable ground with uncanny awareness. I've lived near these woods for 30 years, Tom panted as they climbed a steep incline, and I've never seen a dog navigate them like this. It's as if he's done this journey more than once. By midday, they had covered nearly 8 miles, pushing deeper into the wilderness than most villagers ever ventured. The forest grew denser, the trees taller and more ancient. The men were tiring, but Sentinel showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, the dog seemed increasingly agitated, occasionally breaking into a run before circling back to ensure they were still following. We must be getting close, Sheriff Cooper said, checking his compass. We're well into North Ridge territory now. Just as he spoke, Sentinel froze, his ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled from his throat, not threatening, but alerting. The men instantly went silent, hands moving to their rifles. Through the trees ahead, they caught glimpses of a structure, the cabin old Tom had mentioned. Approach with caution, Sheriff Cooper whispered. We don't know what we're walking into. As they drew closer, the true state of the cabin became apparent. It wasn't simply abandoned, it showed signs of a violent disturbance. The front door hung askew on one hinge, and what appeared to be bullet holes pockmarked the wooden exterior. Windows were shattered, glass glittering on the ground below. Dear God, Elias murmured. What happened here? Sentinel whined anxiously, circling the men before darting toward the cabin's entrance. Sheriff Cooper held up his hand, signaling the others to wait as he cautiously approached the doorway, his weapon drawn. After a tense moment, he called out, Mr. Archer, this is Sheriff Cooper from Pinewood Village. We're here to help. Only silence answered him. With extreme caution, the men entered the cabin. The interior told a story of chaos and struggle. Furniture was overturned, dishes shattered on the floor. Books and papers were strewn everywhere, and dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood marked the rough wooden floor. "Search the place," Sheriff Cooper ordered, "but touch nothing more than necessary. This is a crime scene." As the men carefully moved through the cabin, a sentinel paced anxiously, sniffing the floor and furniture. Suddenly, the dog froze, then began pawing frantically at what appeared to be a simple rug in the corner of the main room. Marcus moved toward the dog. "Sheriff, I think he's found something." Together, they pulled back the rug, revealing a trapdoor built into the floor. Sheriff Cooper exchanged glances with his companions before slowly lifting the heavy wooden door. Below was a small cellar, dimly lit by slivers of light from cracks in the foundation. "Hello?" the sheriff called down. "Anyone down there?" A weak voice responded, barely audible. "Help! Please!" The men descended quickly into the cellar. There, propped against the wall, was a man, presumably Archer, pale and weak, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his thigh, dark with dried blood. Next to him lay another figure, a woman, unconscious but breathing shallowly. "Thank God," the man whispered upon seeing them, tears immediately filling his eyes. "Aurora? Did Sentinel find help for Aurora?" Sheriff Cooper knelt beside the injured man. "The baby is safe in our village. Your dog brought her to us this morning." Relief washed over Archer's face as he reached out a trembling hand to Sentinel, who rushed to his master's side, whimpering and licking his face. "Good boy," Archer whispered. "I knew you would save her." As Marcus and Riley carefully helped the woman, who they now realized was badly injured with what appeared to be a gunshot wound to her shoulder, Elias asked the question on everyone's mind. "What happened here, Mr. Archer?" Archer's eyes darkened. "They came 3 days ago. Men I'd never seen before. They knew who we were, who we really are." He glanced at the unconscious woman. "My wife, Elena. We've been in hiding for almost a year now." "Hiding from what?" Sheriff Cooper pressed. "Not what. Who?" Archer winced as he shifted position. "We were federal witnesses, set to testify against Victor Kazan's organization." The name sent a chill through the room. Even in their remote village, they had heard of Kazan, a notorious crime boss whose influence stretched across 3 states. "We were in witness protection," Archer continued, his voice growing weaker. "But somehow they found us. We managed to fight them off, but not before." He gestured to his leg and his wife's shoulder. "We've been hiding down here, afraid they'd come back. I was losing too much blood to go for help. Elena has been unconscious for almost 2 days now." "But the baby," Elias said, confusion clear in his voice. "Why send your dog with the baby?" A strange expression crossed Archer's face. Part pride, part desperation, part something else entirely. "Aurora isn't ours, not by birth, anyway." Sheriff Cooper's eyebrows rose. "What do you mean?" "The night of the attack," Archer explained, his voice now barely above a whisper. "As we were fighting for our lives, we heard a car crash on the road below. The gunman heard it too and went to investigate. Elena and I used that distraction to escape into our hiding place." He paused, gathering strength. "When everything went quiet, I crawled out to see if I could find help. What I found instead was a crashed car, turned over at the bend in the road. The driver was dead, a young woman, but in the back seat. Aurora," Sheriff Cooper finished for him. Archer nodded. She was perfectly fine, strapped securely in her car seat, some kind of miracle. I couldn't leave her there, not with Kazan's men possibly still in the area. So I brought her back here. But you were both badly injured, Marcus said. How did you care for a baby? A faint smile touched Archer's lips. Sentinel. He's been trained as a service dog. He's remarkably gentle with her. When we realized we weren't going to make it without medical help, I made a choice. His eyes filled with tears again. I wrapped Aurora in Elena's scarf so Sentinel would have her scent, and I gave him the command to seek help. Sheriff Cooper looked at the German shepherd with newfound respect. He traveled 15 miles through wilderness carrying an infant to bring her to safety, and then came back to lead you to us, Archer added weakly. I wasn't sure if it would work. It was a desperate gamble. As they carefully prepared to transport the injured couple back to the village, Sheriff Cooper pulled Elias aside. This is bigger than anything our village has ever dealt with. If Kazan's men are still out there. Elias nodded gravely. We need to contact the federal authorities, but first, we need to get these people to safety. As they emerged from the cellar, Sentinel suddenly stiffened, a low growl building in his throat. The men froze, instantly alert. Sheriff Cooper slowly raised his hand for silence, then pointed toward the tree line visible through the broken window. There, partially concealed among the shadows of the ancient pines, stood 3 figures, men in dark clothing, watching the cabin. One of them raised what was unmistakably a rifle. "Get down!" Sheriff Cooper shouted, just as the first shot splintered the doorframe inches from his head. Chaos erupted in an instant. The men dove for cover as more bullets tore through the cabin's thin walls. Sheriff Cooper crawled to the nearest window, carefully peering out to assess their situation. The 3 gunmen had split up, using the trees for cover as they advanced toward the cabin from different angles. "Marcus, Riley," the sheriff commanded. "Get Archer and his wife to the cellar. It's our best defensive position right now." His voice was steady, despite the dire circumstances. "Elias, Tom, we need to hold them off long enough for backup to arrive." "Backup?" Tom questioned, pressing himself against the wall beside a broken window. "Who even knows we're here?" Sheriff Cooper pulled a small radio from his belt. "Standard protocol. My deputy knows our heading and to send help if we don't report back by sundown." He clicked the radio on. "Deputy Hayes, this is Cooper. We are under attack at the Northridge cabin. Send immediate assistance and contact the federal authorities. Witnesses from Kazan case located. I repeat, witnesses from Kazan case located." Static crackled back at him, but whether the message got through was anyone's guess. Down in the cellar, Marcus and Riley worked quickly to move Archer and Elena to the safest corner. Elena had regained consciousness during the commotion, her eyes wide with fear and pain. "They found us," she whispered, "just like Julian said they would." Marcus paused. "Julian? Who's Julian?" Before Elena could answer, Sentinel began barking frantically, not at the gunfire above but at something else, a sound only his keen ears could detect. Moments later, they all heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping growing steadily louder. "Helicopter," Archer said, his face draining of what little color it had left. "Kazan doesn't take chances. He's bringing in more men." Upstairs, Sheriff Cooper had reached the same conclusion. "We need to move. Now, this location is compromised." "Move where?" Elias asked incredulously. "We're surrounded, outnumbered, and we have 2 critically injured people." The sheriff's mind raced. Years of law enforcement experience had taught him that hesitation meant death in situations like this. "There's an old ranger station about 3 miles east of here. It's built into the side of a hill, more defensible, and has radio equipment that might reach federal channels." A bullet shattered what remained of the window beside Tom, showering him with glass. He ducked lower, cursing under his breath. 3 miles, might as well be 300 if those bastards are hunting us the whole way. Which is why we're going to split up, Sheriff Cooper said decisively. I'll create a diversion, draw their fire. The rest of you take Archer, his wife, and the dog east toward the ranger station. That's suicide, Cooper, Elias protested. Not if I don't engage them directly. The sheriff reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal object, a lighter. This forest had a dry spell before the recent rains. The underbrush to the west will catch quickly. Understanding dawned on Tom's weathered face. A forest fire? That's your diversion? A controlled burn, Cooper corrected. Small enough not to threaten the village, but big enough to demand their attention. Forest fires are bad for business, even for men like Kazan. They bring too many authorities into the area. The plan was risky, but born of necessity. Cooper instructed the others on the route to the ranger station while he prepared to make his move. As a final precaution, he gave Elias his service pistol. Use it only if absolutely necessary. Your priority is getting those people to safety. With a grim nod to his companions, Sheriff Cooper slipped out the back of the cabin and disappeared into the trees, moving west, away from the path the others would take. The remaining men worked quickly, fashioning a crude stretcher for Elena from blankets and broken furniture. Archer insisted he could walk with support, though every step would be agony. As they prepared to leave, Riley noticed a sentinel pawing at a loose floorboard in the corner of the cellar. "What's he doing?" Riley asked. Archer looked over, and his eyes widened. "The evidence," he said urgently. "Help me over there." When they pried up the floorboard, they found a waterproof case containing a laptop, several flash drives, and a stack of documents. "This is what Kazan wants," Archer explained. "Everything we were going to testify about. Financial records, shipping manifests, names of corrupt officials. Elena and I were accountants for Kazan's organization before we turned witnesses. They secured the case and made final preparations to leave." The sound of the helicopter was growing louder, and to make matters worse, they could smell smoke. Sheriff Cooper had started his diversion. Now or never, Elias said grimly. They emerged from the cellar cautiously, finding the main cabin momentarily clear of gunfire. Through the windows they could see commotion in the trees to the west, flashes of movement and shouting as the gunmen spotted the growing smoke. With Sentinel leading the way, they slipped out the east side of the cabin and into the dense forest. Riley and Marcus carried Elena on the makeshift stretcher, while Tom and Elias supported Archer between them. Their progress was painfully slow, but the growing plume of smoke behind them seemed to be working as intended. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by distant shouting and the sound of the helicopter changing course. For nearly an hour, they pushed forward through the difficult terrain, guided by Tom's knowledge of the area and Sentinel's uncanny ability to find the easiest path. Archer's condition was deteriorating rapidly, the exertion reopening his wound. They were forced to stop in a small clearing to rebind his leg. As Elias worked to tighten the bandage, Elena spoke up, her voice stronger than before. "You need to know the truth about Aurora," she said, "in case we don't make it. Save your strength," Elias advised. "You'll tell us everything once we're safe." Elena shook her head weakly. "Number, you need to know now." She glanced at her husband, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The car crash wasn't an accident. That woman wasn't just anyone. The men exchanged confused glances as Elena continued. Her name was Sophia Kazan, Victor's daughter. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Tom was the first to find his voice. "Are you saying the baby is Kazan's granddaughter?" Yes, Archer confirmed. Sophia had been trying to escape her father for months. She contacted us in secret after learning we had turned witnesses. She wanted out, wanted a normal life for her daughter. We were supposed to help her get to the federal marshals, Elena added, but her father's men found our location first. The crash ... Her voice faltered. We think she panicked when she saw the gunman, took the curve too fast. Archer's eyes filled with tears. We couldn't save Sophia, but we could save Aurora, and we knew the evidence wouldn't matter anymore if Kazan got his hands on his granddaughter. He'd trade everything to get her back. That's why he sent so many men, Marcus realized. It's not just about silencing witnesses or recovering evidence. He's looking for his granddaughter. A twig snapped nearby, and Sentinel instantly went rigid, ears forward, a low growl building in his throat. Everyone froze, eyes scanning the surrounding forest. We've lingered too long, Elias whispered. We need to move. They had barely begun to gather themselves when a man stepped into the clearing, rifle leveled at the group. Unlike the tactical gear of the other gunmen, this man wore an expensive suit beneath a long coat, oddly formal attire for the wilderness. His silver hair was immaculately styled, and his eyes were cold as winter ice. I believe, he said in a cultured voice that belied the menace beneath, you have something that belongs to me. Victor Kazan had found them. Before anyone could react, a blur of golden-brown fur launched through the air. Sentinel, loyal protector that he was, flew at Kazan with teeth bared. The crime boss fired once, the shot going wide as he stumbled backward. Man and dog went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. "Run!" Archer screamed, somehow finding the strength to lurch to his feet. "Get Elena and the evidence out of here." Marcus and Riley immediately lifted Elena's stretcher while Tom grabbed the case of evidence. But Elias hesitated, unwilling to leave Archer behind. "Go," Archer insisted, reaching for a fallen branch to use as a makeshift weapon. "Aurora needs to be kept safe from him. That's all that matters now." In the chaos of the moment, difficult decisions were made. Elias handed Sheriff Cooper's pistol to Archer and joined the others as they plunged deeper into the forest, the sounds of struggle fading behind them. Elena sobbed quietly on the stretcher, reaching back toward her husband until the trees obscured him from view. They had barely covered 100 yards when 2 gunshots rang out in quick succession, the sound echoing through the trees. Everyone froze, looking back in horror. "We can't leave him," Elena whispered through her tears. Before anyone could respond, they heard movement in the underbrush behind them. They braced for the worst, Elias raising a heavy branch as a desperate weapon. But it was Sentinel who emerged from the trees, his golden coat now streaked with blood, limping slightly but moving with a determination. There was no sign of Archer or Kazan. "What happened?" Tom asked, as if the dog could answer. "Where's Archer?" Sentinel whined softly, then turned and began moving east again, looking back at them expectantly. "He's still leading us to safety," Marcus realized, even now. With heavy hearts but no other choice, they followed the injured German shepherd, each step taking them farther from the clearing where Archer had made his stand. The fate of both men remained unknown, but the grim reality was that they couldn't go back. Not with Elena's life in the balance and Kazan's men still hunting them. For another grueling hour they pushed on. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, her condition worsening despite their best efforts. The ranger station should have been within reach, but in the chaos and circuitous route they'd taken to avoid detection, Tom had become disoriented. "I don't understand," he muttered, looking around at landmarks that seemed suddenly unfamiliar. "We should have reached it by now." Sentinel, however, showed no such confusion. The dog moved forward with purpose, occasionally returning to the group when they fell too far behind, urging them onward. Despite his own injury, he seemed tireless, driven by some inner purpose they could only guess at. "We should trust the dog," Riley suggested. "He's gotten everything right so far." With no better option, they followed Sentinel as he led them up a steepening slope. The terrain became rockier, the trees thinning out as they climbed. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, they crested a ridge and saw it, not the ranger station they had been seeking, but something potentially better. A small cabin perched on the mountainside, thin smoke rising from its chimney. Someone's home. Elias breathed, hope rising in his chest for the first time in hours. They approached cautiously, all too aware of how their last cabin encounter had gone. Sentinel, however, trotted ahead confidently, stopping at the door and barking twice, not an alarm, but an announcement of their presence. The door opened slowly to reveal an elderly man with a full white beard and suspicious eyes, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. His gaze moved from the injured dog to the ragged group carrying a wounded woman on a makeshift stretcher. "Please," Elias said simply. "We need help." The old man studied them for a long moment, then nodded once and stepped aside. "Bring her in," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Name's Julian Blackwood, former U.S. Marshal." Elena's eyes flew open at the name. "Julian," she whispered, "you're real. He said you'd help us if things went wrong." Julian's weathered face softened slightly. "Who did?" "Our handler, Agent Morris. He said if we ever got separated from him, we should find the hermit marshal on North Ridge." A weak smile touched her lips. "He said you owed him one." Julian's expression darkened. "More than one," he muttered. He gestured them inside, quickly assessing Elena's wound with practiced hands. "Satellite phone's in the back room," he told Marcus. "Call this number. Tell them Julian Blackwood is calling in Morris's marker." As Marcus hurried to make the call, Julian turned his attention to Sentinel, gently examining the dog's injuries. "Good boy," he murmured. "You've done more than anyone had a right to ask of you." Elias quickly explained everything that had happened. The baby delivered safely to the village, Archer's apparent sacrifice, and the evidence they carried. Julian listened without interruption, his face giving away nothing. When Elias finished, Julian nodded thoughtfully. Kazan's been expanding his operation for years. Those documents could bring down his entire empire. He glanced at Elena, who had been given something for the pain and was resting more comfortably. And the baby, his own granddaughter, that explains his personal involvement. Victor Kazan doesn't typically do his own dirty work. "What happens now?" Tom asked. "Now," Julian said, checking the loads in his shotgun, "we wait. Either for my former colleagues to arrive, or for Kazan's men to find us." He looked out the window at the gathering dusk. "And pray your sheriff managed to escape after starting that fire." As night fell, they took turns keeping watch. Sentinel refused to rest, positioning himself near the door, ears constantly alert for any sound of approach. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, his sense of duty never wavered. It was nearly midnight when Sentinel suddenly stood, his posture alert but not aggressive. Moments later, they heard the unmistakable sound of a helicopter approaching. "Could be rescue," Julian said, peering through the window. "Or could be Kazan bringing in reinforcements." They watched anxiously as powerful searchlights swept the mountainside. Julian retrieved a signal flare from a cabinet and moved to the door. "Only one way to find out," he said grimly. Before he could fire the flare, Sentinel began barking excitedly, his tail wagging for the first time since they'd met him. Julian paused, looking at the dog curiously. "He knows something we don't," he observed. The helicopter circled once more, then began to descend in a small clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. As its skids touched down, the door slid open to reveal not Kazan's men, but a team in tactical gear with FBI insignia clearly visible even in the dim light. And emerging behind them, supported by a federal agent on each side, was a familiar figure, bruised and bloodied, but unmistakably alive. Sheriff Cooper had survived. As the federal agents secured the area and medics rushed to attend to Elena, Cooper was helped inside the cabin. His eyes immediately found Sentinel, who approached him with clear recognition, pressing against his leg affectionately. Found him crawling through the underbrush about a mile west of the burning area, Cooper explained, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Smart animal led me straight to a Forest Service road where I could call for help. "What about Archer?" Elena asked weakly from her makeshift bed. "And Kazan?" Cooper's face grew solemn. "We found signs of a struggle at a clearing. Blood, spent casings." He hesitated. "No bodies, but a trail leading north. Kazan's helicopter was spotted landing near the state line about an hour ago." "So, Archer could still be alive?" Hope tinged Elena's voice. "It's possible," Cooper acknowledged. "The feds are tracking Kazan's movements now. If Archer's with him, they'll find him." As medical evacuation was arranged for Elena and plans made to transport the evidence to federal authorities, Sentinel remained vigilant, watching over everything with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should. "What will happen to the dog?" Elias asked as they prepared to leave Julian's cabin. "And the baby, Aurora?" Cooper looked thoughtfully at Sentinel. "That's up to the federal authorities. They'll need to make arrangements for both of them, especially if Archer doesn't." He left the thought unfinished. Julian, who had remained silent during most of the evacuation preparations, suddenly spoke up. "I'll take the dog," he said, surprising everyone. "Temporarily, at least, until things get sorted out." "And Aurora?" Marcus asked. Julian smiled faintly. "I suspect there's a certain doctor back in your village who might be persuaded to look after a baby for a while. Witness protection will want to place her eventually, but these things take time." As dawn broke over the mountains, the helicopter lifted off with Elena securely aboard, accompanied by federal agents and the precious evidence. Sheriff Cooper and his men prepared for the long hike back to Pinewood Village, now escorted by additional FBI agents who had arrived in a second helicopter. Before they left, Cooper knelt beside Sentinel, who sat obediently at Julian's side. "You're a hero, boy," he said softly, running his hand over the dog's thick fur. "Never seen anything like what you did, saving that baby, leading us to Archer and Elena, even finding your way to Julian's cabin when the rest of us were lost." Sentinel tilted his head, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to understand every word. "Some things can't be explained," Julian remarked, watching the interaction. "The bond between that dog and his people, and now the baby, it goes beyond training." As they departed, leaving Sentinel in Julian's care, Elias found himself looking back at the cabin, where Dog and former Marshal stood watching them leave. "Do you think we'll ever know the whole story?" he asked Sheriff Cooper. "About Archer and Kazan, and what really happened up here?" Cooper shook his head slowly. "Some stories don't have clean endings, Elias, but I can tell you this much. That dog knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way. He didn't just save a baby. He may have helped bring down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country." 3 days later, as Pinewood Village was still buzzing with the incredible events, a federal agent arrived at Dr. Reynolds' clinic, where baby Aurora was being cared for. The agent carried official papers and news that both shocked and moved the villagers who had become so invested in the infant's fate. Archer had been found alive, barely, at one of Kazan's properties near the Canadian border. The crime boss himself had escaped, but the evidence recovered was enough to dismantle his operation. Federal prosecutors were moving quickly to build their case. But the most surprising news came in the form of Archer's written statement, given from his hospital bed. In it, he and Elena formally requested that Aurora be placed in the care of Dr. Reynolds, who had formed an immediate bond with the child. Given the unusual circumstances and the ongoing threat from Kazan, the Witness Protection Program was willing to consider this arrangement, placing both doctor and child under their protection. And as for Sentinel, the hero of the entire ordeal, he would be returned to Archer once he recovered, but with a special provision. The dog would be granted official status as Aurora's dedicated protection animal, trained and certified to guard her as he had from the very beginning. 1 week after Sentinel had first appeared at the edge of Pinewood Village, carrying a precious bundle, he returned, escorted by Julian Blackwood. The entire village turned out to welcome the dog who had saved not just a baby, but an entire family and perhaps countless future victims of Kazan's criminal empire. Dr. Reynolds stood at the front of the crowd, cradling Aurora in her arms. As Sentinel approached, his stride strong and proud despite the bandages still visible on his flank, the baby reached out tiny hands toward him, gurgling happily. The German shepherd sat obediently before them, his amber eyes moving between the doctor and the child, with what could only be described as devotion. Permission given with a slight nod from Julian, Sentinel gently pressed his muzzle against Aurora's small hand, accepting her touch with the gentle patience that had made him the perfect guardian for such a precious charge. The actual reason that shocked everyone, Sheriff Cooper remarked, watching the reunion with misty eyes, wasn't just that a dog rescued a baby. It was that he understood exactly what was at stake, and exactly who needed to be brought together to make it right. In the months that followed, as spring turned to summer in Pinewood Village, it became a common sight to see Dr. Reynolds walking with baby Aurora in a stroller, accompanied always by a vigilant German shepherd whose heroism had become the stuff of local legend. Sentinel, now officially designated as Aurora's service animal, maintained his unwavering dedication, a silent guardian whose extraordinary actions had changed so many lives. And sometimes, when the afternoon sun slanted just right through the trees at the edge of the village, visitors would pause to watch the remarkable trio, woman, child, and dog, and marvel at the story that locals were always eager to tell. How a German shepherd walked into their village with a lost human baby, and how the actual reason behind that simple act had shocked everyone who heard the full story. 6 months passed in relative peace. Autumn painted Pinewood Village in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, and as winter approached, the events of that extraordinary spring began to feel almost dreamlike to many of the villagers. Almost, but not quite, for the presence of Dr. Reynolds, baby Aurora, and Sentinel served as a living reminder of the truth behind the tale that had spread far beyond their small community. Aurora flourished under Dr. Reynolds' care, growing from a fragile infant into a curious, bright-eyed toddler, whose laughter could melt even the sternest heart. Sentinel remained her constant shadow, his vigilance never wavering, despite the seeming tranquility of their new life. The German shepherd had become something of a local celebrity. Children would wave to him on the street, and shopkeepers always kept special treats behind their counters for the hero dog. The federal agents who had initially maintained a visible presence in the village gradually reduced their numbers, though they assured Dr. Reynolds that invisible protections remained in place. Archer had recovered from his injuries, and had been relocated to a secure facility where he could continue his rehabilitation while preparing to testify against what remained of Kazan's organization. Elena, too, had survived her ordeal and was reunited with her husband, though for security reasons they had not been permitted to visit Aurora. On a crisp December morning, as the first snow of the season dusted Pinewood Village in a fine powder, Dr. Reynolds received a letter bearing no return address. Inside was a photograph of Archer and Elena, smiling cautiously beside a Christmas tree, and a simple note. "We are healing. We miss you all. Thank you for loving her as your own." Dr. Reynolds showed the photograph to Aurora, who was too young to truly understand but patted the image with chubby fingers nonetheless. Sentinel studied the photograph intently, his intelligent eyes reflecting what might have been recognition. "They're doing well, Doctor," Reynolds told the dog softly. "You saved them all." That night, as Aurora slept soundly in her crib, and Sentinel maintained his customary vigil at the foot of her bed, Dr. Reynolds was startled by a soft knock at her door. It was well past visiting hours, and few in the village would call so late unless there was a medical emergency. Sentinel was instantly alert, moving silently to position himself between the door and Aurora's room, his posture cautious but not alarmed. Dr. Reynolds approached the door carefully, peering through the peephole to see Sheriff Cooper standing on her porch, his expression grave in the dim porch light. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late," he said when she opened the door, stomping snow from his boots before stepping inside. "But I've just received some troubling information that couldn't wait until morning." Dr. Reynolds led him to her kitchen, where they could speak without disturbing Aurora. Sentinel followed, his attentive gaze never leaving the sheriff. "Victor Kazan has escaped federal custody," Cooper said without preamble, his voice low. "It happened during a transfer between facilities yesterday. 2 agents were killed." The color drained from Dr. Reynolds' face. "Does that mean—" "It means we need to be on high alert," Cooper confirmed. "The feds are already mobilizing additional protection for you and Aurora, but they wanted us to know immediately. Have they told Archer and Elena?" Cooper nodded grimly. "They've been moved to a military installation for the time being. Maximum security." He hesitated before adding, "There's something else." Before he escaped, Kazan was overheard telling another inmate that he would reclaim what's rightfully his. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Dr. Reynolds glanced toward Aurora's room, her throat tight with sudden fear. "I won't let anything happen to her," she said with quiet determination. "None of us will." Cooper's weathered face softened slightly. "The whole village stands with you, Doc. But these next few days while they're tracking Kazan, just be extra vigilant." After the sheriff left, Dr. Reynolds found herself unable to sleep. She checked on Aurora repeatedly throughout the night, finding comfort in the sight of her peaceful slumber and Sentinel's unwavering guardianship. The German shepherd hadn't relaxed his vigil for a moment, his eyes alert in the darkness of the nursery. By morning, federal agents had arrived in increased numbers, establishing a perimeter around Dr. Reynolds' home and the clinic. Agent Diana Morris, who had been their primary contact from the Witness Protection Program, arrived to brief Dr. Reynolds on the new security protocols. "We have reason to believe Kazan may attempt to reach Pinewood Village," Agent Morris explained, her tone professional but compassionate. "Not necessarily in person, he's too smart for that, but through associates." "What should I watch for?" Dr. Reynolds asked, bouncing Aurora gently on her hip as they spoke. Sentinel sat at attention nearby, seeming to absorb every word of the conversation. "New faces, unusual deliveries, any break in the village's normal patterns," Morris replied. "Kazan specializes in infiltration through seemingly innocent channels." The days that followed were tense. The village caught in a strange limbo of forced normality underlaid with constant vigilance. Federal agents, both uniformed and plainclothes, became a common sight around Pinewood. Dr. Reynolds continued her medical practice with Aurora often playing in a secure corner of the clinic, Sentinel never more than a few feet away. It was Julian Blackwood, the former marshal who had helped them during the original ordeal, who noticed the first sign of trouble. Having taken to visiting the village periodically to check on Sentinel and Aurora, he had developed a fondness for the little family that had formed under such extraordinary circumstances. The delivery truck that came yesterday, he mentioned casually to Sheriff Cooper as they shared coffee at Elias's shop. Orange logo, Mountain Valley Supplies on the side. Never seen it before. Cooper frowned. Our supplies usually come from Eastern Regional or Palmer's in the next county over. Exactly, Julian nodded. And the driver spent an awful long time unloading at the general store. Kept looking around, too, nervous-like. Within the hour, federal agents had detained the delivery driver as he attempted to leave the village. Under questioning, he broke quickly, admitting he had been paid to gather information about Dr. Reynolds' routines and the layout of her home. More concerning was his confession that others had already infiltrated Pinewood Village over the past week, people posing as tourists, a substitute mail carrier, even a traveling salesman who had gone door to door selling handcrafted items. They're setting up, Agent Morris said grimly during an emergency meeting at the sheriff's office. Classic Kazan strategy. Place multiple assets in position before making any move. Then we evacuate Dr. Reynolds and Aurora immediately, Cooper insisted. Morris shook her head. That might be exactly what they're expecting. Roads can be ambushed, helicopters can be tracked. Sometimes the safest place is where our security is already established. The debate continued into the evening without clear resolution. Meanwhile, Dr. Reynolds continued her normal routine as advised, though now with an agent openly stationed inside her home. As she bathed Aurora that night, she couldn't help but notice Sentinel's unusual behavior. The German shepherd had been restless all day, frequently moving to windows and doors, his ears constantly alert to sounds beyond human perception. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly as she tucked Aurora into bed. "What do you sense?" As if in answer, Sentinel moved to the nursery window, placing his paws on the sill to look out into the darkness. Dr. Reynolds joined him, peering out at the snow-covered yard where a federal agent stood guard beneath a street lamp. Everything appeared peaceful, the village quieting for the night under its blanket of fresh snow. Yet Sentinel's unease persisted. That night, he refused to settle in his usual spot near Aurora's crib, instead positioning himself directly in front of the nursery door, his body tense as if expecting trouble at any moment. Dr. Reynolds reported the dog's behavior to Agent Morris first thing in the morning. "Animals often sense things we miss," Morris acknowledged, her expression thoughtful. "The protection detail hasn't reported anything unusual, but I'll have them conduct another sweep of the perimeter." The day passed uneventfully, but Sentinel's vigilance never wavered. By evening, even the federal agents had begun to take note of the dog's persistent alertness. One agent, who had worked with canine units previously, suggested they might be missing something subtle that only Sentinel could detect. "These service dogs are trained to recognize patterns and changes that most humans overlook," he explained. "If Sentinel thinks something's wrong, I'd trust his instincts." That night, as a precaution, Agent Morris arranged for additional security measures, motion sensors around the property, infrared cameras, and 2 more agents stationed inside the house. Dr. Reynolds went through her evening routine with Aurora, trying to maintain normalcy despite the tension that permeated the atmosphere. As midnight approached, with Aurora sleeping peacefully and the house secure under federal watch, Dr. Reynolds finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She sat in the living room with a cup of tea, Sentinel lying at her feet but still noticeably alert. One agent stood by the front windows while another monitored the security feeds in the kitchen. The power went out at precisely 12:17 a.m. The house plunged into darkness, emergency lights activating seconds later as the agents immediately moved to high alert. Sentinel was on his feet in an instant, not barking but growling low in his throat, his attention fixed on the ceiling above them. "The attic," Dr. Reynolds whispered, sudden understanding dawning. "There's access through the roof." The agents reacted instantly, one rushing toward the attic access panel in the hallway while the other called for backup on his radio. Sentinel, however, had already bolted for Aurora's room, Doctor. Reynolds close behind him. They weren't fast enough. As they reached the nursery door, a dark-clad figure was already inside, lifting a still-sleeping Aurora from her crib. The intruder had come through the window, the security system disabled during the power outage. "Put her down," Dr. Reynolds demanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Now." The intruder turned, revealing a woman's face beneath a black tactical mask. "Sorry, Doc," she said, her voice tinged with what might have been genuine regret. "Grandfather wants his heir back." What happened next occurred so quickly that Dr. Reynolds would later have difficulty recalling the exact sequence of events. Sentinel launched himself across the room, not at the intruder, but at the window behind her, shattering through the glass with a crash that finally woke Aurora, who began to cry. Shouts erupted outside, followed by a series of popping sounds that Dr. Reynolds recognized as suppressed gunfire. The female intruder hesitated, momentarily distracted by the commotion outside, the distraction Sentinel had deliberately created. In that crucial moment, Agent Morris appeared in the doorway, her weapon trained steadily on the intruder. "Federal agent, put the child down and put your hands where I can see them." For a heartbeat, it seemed the intruder might comply. Then, with startling speed, she lunged toward the window, still clutching Aurora. Dr. Reynolds cried out in horror, certain both the intruder and Aurora would plummet to the ground below. Instead, they fell into what appeared to be a safety net positioned beneath the window, a contingency plan for the kidnapping that revealed how meticulously it had been orchestrated. The intruder rolled to her feet, Aurora wailing in her arms, and began running toward the tree line where a vehicle's headlights suddenly illuminated. Agent Morris fired a warning shot but couldn't risk hitting Aurora. Federal agents converged from all directions, but they had been strategically drawn away from that particular escape route by diversionary tactics elsewhere on the property. What none of the kidnappers had accounted for, however, was Sentinel. The German Shepherd, having crashed through the window specifically to intercept this escape route, was already in pursuit. Despite the fall, despite the broken glass that had cut into his coat, the dog raced after the kidnapper with singular focus. He caught her at the edge of the trees, latching onto her leg with enough force to bring her down, but with the careful precision that came from his service dog training, enough to stop her, not enough to cause severe damage. The woman fell forward, twisting her body to avoid landing on Aurora, who continued to scream in terror. Federal agents reached them seconds later, securing the kidnapper and retrieving a frightened but unharmed Aurora. When Dr. Reynolds arrived, breathless and frantic, she found Aurora being examined by a medical agent while Sentinel stood guard, blood from his cuts marking the pristine snow around him. "She's okay," Agent Morris assured her, placing Aurora in her arms. "Thanks to that incredible dog of yours." The aftermath of the attempted kidnapping brought significant changes to their situation. The woman who had tried to take Aurora was identified as Lydia Mercer, a former Special Forces operative now working for Kazan's organization. Her capture led to the identification of 3 other infiltrators in Pinewood Village, all of whom were arrested within hours. More importantly, information extracted from their communications led federal authorities to a safe house where Victor Kazan himself was hiding. The crime boss was recaptured 2 days later in a raid that made national headlines. For Dr. Reynolds, Aurora, and Sentinel, the implications were life-changing. With Kazan back in custody and facing additional charges for the kidnapping attempt, the immediate threat had diminished significantly. However, the incident had revealed the vulnerabilities in their protection arrangements. "We need to discuss long-term solutions," Agent Morris explained during a debriefing at Sheriff Cooper's office. "The Witness Protection Program has protocols for situations like this, but Aurora's case is unique." "What are you suggesting?" Dr. Reynolds asked, holding Aurora close. Sentinel sat beside her chair, his wounds from the previous night's events bandaged, but his alertness undiminished. "Relocation," Morris said simply. "A new identity, a new start, somewhere far from here. Somewhere Kazan's remaining associates would never think to look." The proposal hit Dr. Reynolds like a physical blow. Pinewood Village had become her home, its people, her extended family. The thought of leaving, of taking Aurora away from the only community she had known, was painful to contemplate. "I'd be coming too, of course," Morris added, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "I've been assigned as your permanent protection detail, and arrangements would be made for Sentinel as well." As discussions continued over the following days, an unexpected communication arrived from the Federal Detention Center where Archer and Elena were being held. Through their attorneys, they had made a formal request. They wanted Dr. Reynolds to adopt Aurora legally and permanently, with themselves as godparents who could maintain contact from a distance. "They recognize the bond you've formed with her," Agent Morris explained, "and they believe this arrangement would give Aurora the most stable future possible while honoring their connection to her." The decision was not an easy one. Dr. Reynolds spent long hours contemplating what would be best for Aurora, for herself, and even for Sentinel, whose heroism had once again saved them all. In the end, it was the German Shepherd who helped clarify her thinking. One evening, as she sat on her porch swing watching Sentinel and Aurora play in the snow, the dog patiently allowing the toddler to pat snowflakes from his fur, Sheriff Cooper joined her, offering a cup of hot chocolate as he settled into the chair beside her. "You know," he said conversationally, "Julian told me something interesting about Sentinel's training. Apparently, service dogs like him are taught to adapt to new environments quickly, to recognize new safe spaces and protect them just as fiercely as the old ones." Dr. Reynolds understood the gentle metaphor. "You think we should accept the relocation?" Cooper shrugged. "I think home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the people and the four-legged friends who surround us." He watched Aurora giggling as Sentinel shook snow from his coat. "That little girl will thrive anywhere you are, Doc. And so will that dog." 2 weeks later, as dawn broke over Pinewood Village, a small gathering assembled at Elias's shop to say their goodbyes. Dr. Reynolds would be leaving with Aurora, Sentinel, and Agent Morris that morning, bound for a destination known only to a handful of federal officials. "We'll miss you something fierce," Elias said, his voice rough with emotion as he hugged Dr. Reynolds. "But this isn't goodbye forever. Once everything's settled with the trials and such, maybe we can visit." "I'd like that, Doctor," Reynolds replied, blinking back tears. One by one, the villagers who had become so entwined in their extraordinary story offered their farewells. Sheriff Cooper, Marcus and Riley, Old Tom, Even Julian Blackwood had come down from his mountain cabin to see them off. As they prepared to depart, a federal courier arrived with a small package for Dr. Reynolds. Inside was a handcrafted silver pendant in the shape of a shepherd dog standing protectively beside a small child. A note accompanied it. Some bonds transcend distance. Be safe. Be happy. Dr. Reynolds fastened the pendant around Aurora's neck, who immediately reached for it with curious fingers. Sentinel watched the gesture with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand everything. The SUV that would take them to their new life waited at the edge of the village, its engine running in the cold morning air. As Dr. Reynolds settled Aurora into her car seat with Sentinel taking his customary position beside her, she looked back at the village that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely family. "Ready?" Agent Morris asked from the driver's seat. Dr. Reynolds took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready?" As they drove away, Aurora babbled happily in her car seat, one hand resting on Sentinel's fur. The German shepherd maintained his vigilant watch out the window, guardianship that would never waver no matter where their journey took them. In the years that followed, the story of the German shepherd who walked into Pinewood Village with a lost human baby would be told and retold, growing sometimes in the telling, as such stories tend to do. But those who had been there, who had witnessed the truth behind the tale, knew that no embellishment could match the reality of what they had experienced. And somewhere far away, in a place where their past couldn't find them, a young girl grew up with her adoptive mother and her beloved German shepherd, safe and loved and protected. Aurora would always know her unique story, how a dog's extraordinary courage and intelligence had not only saved her life, but had brought together the unlikely family that surrounded her with unwavering love. Sentinel lived to a remarkable age for a German shepherd, remaining Aurora's guardian and companion well into her teenage years. And when he finally grew old and gray, he did so with the quiet dignity of one who had fulfilled his purpose completely and without reservation. On the day of his passing, a teenage Aurora held him close and whispered, "You walked into a village with me once, a long time ago. Now I'll carry you in my heart forever." In a small secure facility not far from where they now lived, an elderly Victor Kazan received news of the faithful dog's passing. The crime boss, once powerful and feared, had lost everything. His empire, his freedom, and the granddaughter he had sought to claim through violence and intimidation. Yet even he, hardened by decades of criminal enterprises, paused in apparent reflection when told of Sentinel's death. "That dog," he was overheard saying to his attorney, "understood loyalty better than any human I've ever known." It was, perhaps, the most honest tribute that could be paid to the German shepherd who had changed so many lives through one brave act. Walking into a village at dawn with a precious bundle held gently in his jaws, setting in motion a story that would continue to resonate long after his own journey had ended. And occasionally, on quiet evenings when Aurora shared memories with her own children, she would tell them about Sentinel, the extraordinary dog who had once carried her to safety and had never stopped protecting her since. The reason that had shocked everyone, she would explain, wasn't just the dog's bravery or intelligence, but the profound truth it revealed, that sometimes the deepest wisdom and the purest love come from beings who never speak a word. For in the end, Sentinel's story wasn't just about heroism. It was about the bonds that form between the most unlikely souls, transcending language and species and circumstance, bonds that reshape destinies and remind us all of what truly matters in this world.